way. I'm Dedrick, and unfortunately I'm going to have to be alone today because all of our members had something going on, but I promised to get you guys a podcast out today, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do the mini podcast I was meant for last Wednesday. So, yeah. And that podcast would be summarizing all of the U.S. presidents. So, yeah. And this is inspired by the Bear Whisperer. If you don't know who he is, I'd check him out, give him some love. Because he hasn't uploaded in like a year and a half. But nonetheless, he is a great YouTuber and he will surely give you a laugh. So I'm going to go into present mode here. So yep, all the presidents summarized. So our first one, we got George Washington. His terms were in 1789 to 1797. An interesting fact about him, I really couldn't find a very, very interesting fact. He was first president of the United States of America, and there's his portrait. So, obviously, you know him as one of our founding fathers, very good general, and well, the rest you know, because I mean, who doesn't know about my man George Washington? The next guy, we got John Adams. His terms were from 1797 to 1801. An interesting fact about him, he was the first to marry in office. Again, one of our founding fathers, and, well, nonetheless, a very important person. He mostly fought for liberty, even during his presidency, but an interesting thing is that he signed a law where saying bad things in public or in paper about the presidents could sentence you up to 5 years in jail. So, don't know all about that liberty, my boy. Our next guy is Thomas Jefferson. His terms were from 1801 to 1809. He was the first person to live in the entire White House. The entire White House. So, dear God. So, yeah, and this is the portrait of him. He was the main writer of the Declaration of Independence. Very good president. He also followed a pretty strange religion. He was a deist, which basically meant that he thought there was a God, but since creating the earth, he had to interfere it with sense. So he's basically saying every religion that believes God has an influence on you, they don't. He just created the earth, and that's about it. So, next, James Madison, from 1809 to 1817. He was the shortest president at 5 feet 4 inches. As an example, I am 5'9". I was 5 inches taller than our fourth president, but as said, a lot of our presidents back then were a lot shorter. Except for George Washington, he was 6 foot. So yeah. Anyway, he had to oversee the War of 1812, which was Britain fighting versus America for some land, and well, it was pretty unnecessary war in my opinion. But there's nothing more to say about him. He was a good president and will forever be known as that. Next. James Monroe, in my opinion, a very unknown president. I couldn't find much on him, other than he was the first senator to be elected president. This is a famous portrait of your boy. And well, when he was a senator, he wasn't a senator for a very long time. He was a senator for like 3 years, but he was the first former senator to become president. So, yeah, there's that. And let's move on. We have John Quincy Adams, an interesting president in both his election and during his presidency. The interesting fact I wrote for him was he was the first son of a former president to be president. His father is obviously, just get rid of this damn Quincy, John Adams. So you got John Quincy Adams. So, yeah, and also in his election, he was the first. So it was a 4-way election. It was him, Andrew Jackson, and another and two other guys. No one got the majority despite Andrew Jackson winning the Electoral College vote and the popular vote. But it went to the House of Representatives and the Senate and the House of Representatives chose your boy John Quincy Adams, but kind of a bad choice because he was not considered to be a great president. Next. And then Andrew Jackson won versus in a rematch, I would call it. He served from 1829 to 1837. He was the first and only president so far to kill someone while in office. The way he did this is that he was a fan of duels. And, most of the time the duels didn't end in a death. They just ended in someone getting injured. But in one of them, I couldn't find an article on it. But I don't think we know the person that he killed. It was someone important in his personal life. But he shot him right through the throat. And boom, there you go. Andrew Jackson. He was an interesting president, and also he's again, we don't know, but he's the only president to be born in South Carolina. So, next, Martin Van Buren. This guy. He only served one term from 1837 to 1841. He was the first president to be born in the United States of America, and also his first language was Dutch, which I find kind of weird. But nonetheless, he was an interesting president. Well, he didn't do any interesting, but what people thought of him. No one really thought he could do anything, and they were exactly right. He didn't do anything good, but he didn't do anything bad. So there's that. Anyway, I got nothing more to say on this guy other than he was a mediocre president, and he had some interesting facts about him. William Henry Harrison. This should be known by most people. He only served 31 days because he gave the longest inaugural speech ever, which lasted like 3 hours or something, like 3.5 hours. And then he got pneumonia from the cold, and then 31 days into his presidency, he passed away from pneumonia. Yeah. He really didn't do anything in his presidency. He didn't sign anything. He just gave his inaugural speech plus an extra speech, which just alleviated some fears. But he didn't really do anything. Alright, moving forward, we have John Tyler, my man. He was the first vice president to become president because, well, obviously William Henry Harrison kicked the bucket. He only served one term, and honestly, everyone, like Congress, they didn't know what to do. And they honestly did not know what to do with themselves. And what would happen? John Tyler says, hey, maybe I could become president. Maybe vice president could have a bigger role. And they're like, you know what? That is not a bad idea. So that's what happened. John Tyler became the first vice president to become president. And he was overall an above average president. Next. James K. Polk served one term, and overall, he was above average president. He was the first president to be elected for the age of 50. So, yeah. All these other presidents were Also, actually, going back, I forgot to say this about William Henry Harrison. He was the last president to be born of a British subject. Might be saying, weren't all these guys? No. All of these presidents right here, they were all born in Britain. And then, one more. Martin Van Buren was, he was the first to be born in the USA, but it didn't become an official rule until after William Henry Harrison, John Tyler, It only became an official rule of the presidency that you had to be born a U.S. Born in the U.S. in order to become president. It was John Tyler was the one that signed it. So moving on back to James K. Polk. Honestly, there was nothing really interesting about him other than after he was president, he died 3 months after from, I think, flu of some sort. Yeah, I think it was a flu of some sort. Hold on, give me a quick second. I need some water. Just 2 seconds. That's good water. Anyway, next we have Zachary Taylor. He served from 1849 to 1850. The first president to have their photo taken. This was the first ever photo of any president. You might be saying, doesn't Martin Van Buren look like he has it? No, that's a black. It's very deceptive. A very deceptive picture right here. But this is, well, it's not a picture, it's a portrait. But it's very deceptive, but it is just a black and white one. Oh, moving back. Well, that's a bit of a hint on who's up next. Anyway, Zachary Taylor, he bit the bullet only 13 or so months into his 13 months into his presidency, and overall didn't really do much. He signed an act that gave the Indians a bit more, or I should say Native Americans, gave the Native Americans some more, just less strict rules on where they have to go. So they're allowed outside their reservation. He was the one that signed that the Native Americans are allowed to go outside of their reservations. But that's the only major thing he did. He made some speeches, but that's about it. Moving on, Millard Fillmore. This one, there's not much data to back this up, but based on what people said and the very little data that was given, he was the first and only president to not eat a single meal in the White House because he felt like, because he didn't have a necessarily good relationship with the people, because he said that he did not have a good relationship with the people inside of the kitchen, and he was afraid that they might poison the food. He probably did eat food at the White House, but there's no evidence backing up either way. So, yeah, and he wasn't a very good president. He was actually he's considered to be in the top 10 worst presidents. Last I checked, he was rated number 7. Moving on. Franklin Pierce, known as the worst president. The worst president. To back that up, he's the first president to be denied re-election, and only 2 more presidents after this, we'll get to them soon, only 2 more presidents after him have been denied re-election. Imagine being denied re-election. All the other presidents, they either chose to not run for re-election or they lost the re-election. No, only him and 2 more presidents were denied. And that's how you know he was a bad president. He signed the horrible Kansas-Nebraska Act, which sent people flooding into Kansas and Nebraska. Pro and anti-slavery people, duked it out, and what became Bleeding Kansas. Roughly 6 years of brutal fighting, causing tens of thousands of deaths. Is very bad period. It happened before the Civil War, which we are getting to soon. We are very close, just a couple more presidents. He also signed the Fugitive Slave Act, where if slaves were to retreat back into or were to escape to the north, Southerners, the people that owned the slaves, were allowed to go back in and, go capture them. And honestly, the North didn't like it. Some Southerners didn't like it. That it was technically illegal for slaves to leave, but it wasn't the law. if that makes sense. It was a weird article that I read on this guy. James Buchanan, ya boy. Eh, well, not really a boy. He was also a really crappy president. Also in the top 10 worst presidents. He's the only bachelor to be president. He was divorced before presidency, so technically you could no, there have been other presidents who shall remain nameless until we get to them, if I remember to name them. But he served from 1857 to 1861. The only thing he was really known for is ruining and weakening the relationship between North and South, if it hadn't already been ruined by the guy previous. And well, he also said, interestingly, he wanted he made an accusation, and it proved out to be right. He said that the president that would happen after would get assassinated. And well, he was right. Because I think the main reason why he said this is because he knew a civil war was coming. And if the North would have won, or the South would have won, they would have assassinated the president. And that's what happened. Moving on. Abraham Lincoln, old honest Abe. He only served one term plus a little bit extra, seriously just a couple days extra. He's the first president to be assassinated in office. And he had to oversee the Civil War, a very hard time in our history, and well, overall, he was a really interesting president. No one was really like him. He was determined and stuff like that. So, you would think after a good president like this, and also he was the first Republican, so that's an interesting fact about him. You would think a great president like him, seriously, he's in the top 5 best presidents. I don't know where, but you would think a good president like him would have a good VP. Well, his vice president was Andrew Johnson. Yep, this guy. He served one term, and he was the second president to be denied re-election. Hold on, I need a quick drink. Bit parched. That's good water. Anyway, he was the first president to be impeached because he vetoed a lot of good things. A lot of good things that would work towards black people getting their freedom. But he vetoed them because he had the power. Anyway, he was the first president to be impeached, but he was acquitted by a tiny margin. In order to be removed from office, more than 2/3 of Congress had to vote him out. But he won by like 5 people voting that he should stay in. So overall, really crappy president. He's in the top 5 worst. Ulysses S. Grant, a Civil War general. And also, I meant to change this. This is meant to say alias. But he's the only president to not use their real name. Ulysses S. Grant is not his real name. 2 parts of it are, but a lot of people think that the S stands for Simpson. It doesn't. It's just an S. There is nothing in here. His real name is Herman Ulysses Grant. So, yeah, honestly, his first term was really good. He helped a lot of things. He went back to the gold standard. The gold standard wasn't a great thing, but it was good at the time. He signed a lot of acts that were really good for the United States. He signed a couple that were bad. But overall, his first term was really good. Second term was it wasn't bad, but it was mediocre. He didn't do anything exponential, but he didn't do anything horrible, like how some previous presidents had. But overall, he's a really interesting and nice change of view. And also, he's the first president in a while to serve more than one term. Rougher to be Haynes, and he is interesting. He is not the first president to do anything. He was definitely an interesting president. No, he wasn't. No, he wasn't an interest. He was a mediocre president. There was nothing much to say about him other than he was not horrible. He signed a couple good acts, a couple bad acts. He made some really, really powerful speeches. And he's also there. Also, I could have put this here. I just remembered it, but I couldn't find it anywhere. He is the first president to have his voice recorded. You can look up, and well, I'll leave you to that. Honestly, he wasn't a horrible president, but wasn't good. James A. Garfield, interesting president. Not at all, because he was assassinated 8 months into his presidency. He was the first president to be assassinated in their first term. Honestly, he did one really good thing, and it was signing an act that allowed transportation between the U.S. and Mexico. Because before it was completely restricted, no trade could happen. But now, guess what? Because of him, we were allowed small amount of trade. Nothing big, like not military stuff, but like goods. But it wasn't a big export-import. It was just so we could ease the tension between them. But that was about it. He did. Chester A. Arthur, my man. He is the only president to say that he didn't want to be. Sorry. He's the only president to say that he did not want to be president, which I find crazy. Who wouldn't want to be president? Also, Lyndon B. Johnson also said that, and he came after JFK getting his head blown off. So now I understand. But he served basically one term. He didn't do anything exponentially, but he didn't do anything horrible. Also, to state, since Abraham Lincoln, every single one of these presidents have been Republican and Democrat. So yeah. Grover Cleveland. His first term, he had some good economics and other stuff like that, but again, do you really care? Unless this is an essay that you came to this video for, I don't think this is the right video for you. I think if you made it this far, and I'm telling you this now, yeah, you might want to leave, because this is just general information. This ain't deep. But Grover Cleveland, he served from 1885 to 1889 and was taken over by Benjamin Harrison. But remember the name, okay? Remember, Grover, Grover, and Cleveland, like the city. Remember the name. Remember this man's name. Remember his name. Okay. Benjamin Harrison, a pretty good president. Was not horrendous, but he beat Grover Cleveland by just a couple votes. He's first president to be a billionaire. A self-made billionaire. There have been other presidents that have been billionaires, but he is the first one to have a billionaire at the height of his money income, or income, not money income. That's what a 30-year-old would say. Yeah. He had about $1.6 billion, so he was quite a rich man, but he gave most of his income to charity, which is really nice of him. He was also said to be a Santa because he was a very giving person. Overall, he was good on a moral status, but in presidential, he was mediocre. Nothing more to say. Grover Cleveland! Grover Cleveland was the only president to serve 2 non-consecutive terms. You might be saying, okay, are you freaking out on me, or are you being serious? I am being serious. But his second term wasn't all that good. It was actually considered to be one of the worst. But his first time was okay. But his second presidency was not that good. So yeah, no need to remember this name anymore. Just get it out of your mind unless you have to study on Grover Cleveland and your damn essays. William McKinley, the first president to use a phone. Yeah. He didn't do much. He was assassinated. The guy after him, though. Yeah, good man. Theodore Roosevelt, my man. He signed the Square Deal, which allowed a lot of economic stuff to happen in the US, which just allowed more money and better living for people. And also, he was shot. He was shot by a very low caliber bullet, but overall, he still got to a speech and gave a 1.5 hour speech until people realized that he had blood dripping from there. And the Secret Service, like, hey man, you need to. Okay, man, we gotta save you, man. You're gonna bleed out, because he was starting to look a bit more pale. But overall, that was a really cool move. He's also the youngest president ever, at 42 years and 322 days. Basically 43 years. But overall, remember this guy, definitely top 5 president right here. William Howard Taft, the only president to serve in the Supreme Court. His first half of his presidency was pretty good. He continued on what the Roosevelt did, but overall he really didn't. In the second half, he completed what he wanted, and it was a really bad. So people are kind of disputed on where to rate this guy. Was he a good president? Was he a bad president? No one knows. Next. Woodrow Wilson, the first president to visit Europe. Not a very interesting fact, but he was also technically the first president to live through a world war. So yeah, he lived through World War I, and U.S. entered in 1917 and completely changed the tides on how it was. It was a stalemate before, but as soon as the U.S. War ends roughly 11 months later. Sorry, I need a little bit more drink. Warren G. Harding. His presidency was honestly pretty good. He did a lot of good things in his presidency, and also the first president to have a woman vote for him. Interesting. Now, that's the norm, like how it should be. And if I offend you by saying that, well, okay. I offend you. Hold on, I'm gonna get out of continue. Calvin Coolidge. A huge upgrade from this guy. Anyway, he's described to look like every substitute teacher. And now thinking about it, it looks like it. He is the first and only president to be born in Vermont. He was definitely taking for the people, by the people to heart, because he did a lot of things for charity, and that would help the people. And overall, I like this guy. He did fine. He very underrated president. Herbert Hoover. I like to describe him as a president. He was caught up at the wrong place at the wrong time. I'm still laughing. Anyway, he was the first president to give all of his federal checks to charity because during his presidency, he had to oversee the Great Depression and the Wall Street crash. And he was overall a pretty crappy president. But, do you blame him? I mean, what would you do? He had to raise taxes for some reason. He built the Hoover Dam, but he was just... I don't know what to say to him. He was okay. He would have been okay if we don't even know what he would be if the Great Depression didn't happen, but it did. The guy after him is considered to be one of, if not the greatest president in the history of this nation, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. This man served the longest term, from 19 longest consecutive terms. From 1933 to 1945, he won 4 separate times, living through 3 complete ones and just about a month into his 4th one. He sadly passed away due to old age. But he fixed the mess that Herbert Hoover had to deal with. He had to oversee World War II, and he was overall a very nice guy about it. And in 1941, when Japan spit on them, he immediately helped the people. And World War II was actually not a bad time for the U.S. Unemployment dropped below 1%. And overall, he was a very, very good president. Did very few things wrong. In his second term were the things that he did wrong, but it wasn't much. Like, it was basically the equivalent of spitting in public. Okay, it's rude, but it's not illegal. But overall, very good president, and I think more people should talk about him. Harry S. Truman, first president to use a nuke. Yeah, I couldn't find much on him. But overall, he oversaw the end of World War II, Japan's surrender, and then he had this deal with the start of World War II. He released the Truman Doctrine, which basically said, though the Soviets are not good people, and I will do anything I can to slow or completely stop the spread of communism in the world. And that started the Cold War, which was a series of mini-wars and scuffles between the two biggest powers of the 20th century. And more presidents will have to deal with it the more we get into. But overall, he dealt with a lot, and he also had to deal with the Korean War. So, yeah, it was an interesting president, but nonetheless, he didn't do a horrible job. He was above average president. Dwight D. Eisenhower, a World War II general, the third major general on our list. He was the first president to be president of all 50 states, because in 1959, Alaska and Hawaii became the 49th and the 48th state of the United States. Overall, he was a really good president. He had sorry, damn, all this talking's getting me parched. But yeah, he was an interesting. Well, he wasn't an interesting president. He was a good president. More of these modern presidents were good, except for a few. We will get to them soon. And also, these aren't my opinions. These are my opinions supported by facts. It's a big difference. So, I like this guy. This guy was pretty good. I thought he did good. He signed a lot of good acts. He made the good speeches. He fought for the people. And honestly, when he died, the people, a lot of people weren't sad, but a good amount of people were sad. And I can understand why. He was a good president. I liked him. I like Ike. John F. Kennedy, one of the few presidents you probably know by heart unless you're like me, and I can name you every single one in order from oldest to newest. Anyway, he was the youngest elected president. Elected. So if you go back to what we did in that accidental part 1, Theodore Roosevelt was the youngest president ever. That's because he came after William McKinley, who was damn shot. But, come on, keep going. John F. Kennedy was the youngest elected at 43 years and 236 days. And overall, in those few years, he saw so much. He had to oversee Vietnam, the Bay of Pigs, the Cuban Missile Crisis. He had to oversee civil rights in the southern states. This guy could not get a break, and when he did get a break, he got shot by communist rats, who we still don't know but I have a feeling. What we have a good feeling is Lee Harvey Oswald, but we will never know because he never went to trial, and we didn't get a big background check on the guy. So yeah, honestly, very good president, top 5 president. I think I've said. I think he tops up the top 5, but there are more presidents that I would say. Lyndon B. Johnson. Whoever says this guy wasn't a good president, you need to watch a certain movie. I will point out the movie to you. I will not show it on this channel, but if you look up Lyndon B. Johnson movie or JFK assassination movie, a certain movie will come up. It has Bryan Cranston in it. It will show you how much this guy went through. He was the one that made civil rights, who ended the civil rights movement in the positive way, how it should have been, and made segregation almost completely abolished. It took a little bit more time, but overall, he was a really good president. He was also sworn in on a plane. He's also the only president to be sworn in on a plane, and he's the first president to be sworn in by a woman, which was a big thing back then. I don't know why it should have been a big thing. It should have been possibly the norm. I don't know why it isn't. But honestly, great president, extremely underrated. But he would lose to a famous, yet kind of bad president, depends on your views on him, Richard Nixon. He did good things. He was a good president during his presidency, but just like Warren G. Harding, it was near the end of the presidency that caused him to have the downfall. He was caught up in the Watergate scandal where a bunch of people sold information to each other, and Richard Nixon forced them to, and he teamed up with the CIA, the IRS, and the FBI to make sure that nothing happened. But when the public found out, he called himself not a crook, and he resigned in 1973. The guy that would follow back behind him is Gerald Ford, a very interesting president, because he's the only president to not be elected president or vice president. Because Richard Nixon's the only one to have resigned, the rules of resignation, or however you say it, I'm not good English. But the rules is that when a president resigns, there is no election to be had or anything to have happened. He will immediately be inaugurated, just like other. But see, other presidents have done that. But as a VP, back in the day, until like the 80s or so, there was a rule that this usually wasn't what happened. Usually there would be an election for who would be the VP, but if the president had won, if the president-elect had won in an absolute landslide and overall had good had good morals with everyone, he could that president could choose who they wanted, and Richard Nixon chose Gerald Ford. Gerald Ford was a mediocre president. Underrated, definitely. We kind of gloss over his story. I don't have a movie recommendation for him, but overall underrated, but not by much. Jimmy Carter. He was the first president to be born in a hospital. Interesting, right? Anyway, he didn't really sign much. Oh, he signed SALT II. So that was nice. Sorry. I'm so parched. I'm doing so much talking. At least I had a break in the other podcast. Alright, this water's starting to do very little for me now. So I'm going to have to wrap these guys up. So Jimmy Carter was an interesting president. He's one of the few presidents to win the Nobel Peace Prize. But he is not the only He's not the only president, but he won it in 2002 by setting up the Carter Center, and overall he was a pretty good president, but he would be completely overshadowed by Ronald Reagan, my man. Y'all know him, y'all love him. Well, most of you love him. Ronald Reagan served 2 entire full terms. He is the first former actor to be president, and overall he had a lot of money. So the idea, and when you have a lot of money, you tend to think of very financial ideas. Reminds you of someone, and that person we will get to soon. And overall, he had an idea called Reaganomics, which overall meant that the wealthy would slowly but surely trickle down money to the less fortunate ones. But he thought that he could increase détente, which was the decrease of aggressiveness between the Soviet Union and the USA, but he didn't do that after blasting open the arms race again. And he was so focused with that he completely ignored the AIDS pandemic and the cruelty towards black men. So yeah, he was good on the outside, but on the inside he was not very good. Then you have George H.W. Bush, the only future president to be acting president. In 1985, Ronald Reagan was victim of an assassination attempt and had to get surgery. So for roughly 28 days, George H.W. Bush was acting president. But he's the only acting president. He was the only acting president to become president in the future. So, yeah. And honestly, nothing interesting will come to until we reach future presidents. Bill Clinton, the second president to be impeached. Again, he was acquitted because in 1998, he had a press secretary censor. Because I'm not going to say this, despite this channel being classified as not for kids. I need more water. Overall, he was a fairly good president other than that scandal, but that scandal became the defining moment of his presidency, which is sad because he was a good president. I liked him when he was around. Well, I wasn't alive when he was around, but my parents, they were very happy when he was around. He was a good president. He was nice. George W. Bush. He's the second He is the second son of a president to become president. His father was George H.W. Bush. Previously, in the previous episode, please, if you haven't watched that, go watch that now. If you made it this far, I don't know why. But, yeah, he had John Adams was the father of John Quincy Adams, so, yeah. He's also the only president to have the highest and lowest approval rate. In his first term, he had the highest approval rate, but in the second term, he had the lowest approval rate. Interesting. He won an extremely tight election against Al Gore. It came down to Florida, and well, Bush won Florida. And overall, he had just, well, it was an interesting president. In his presidency, he had to oversee the 9/11 crisis, the Iraq War. He started the war in Afghanistan, and he oversaw Osama bin Laden. No, not Osama bin Laden. We'll get to him soon with the next guy. But no, Saddam Hussein get found and executed. So yeah, he had some heights, he had some bads, but overall, he was interesting. And also, unlike the Bear Whisperer, I'm not afraid to give I'm going to limit my opinion on these because I don't want to get a whole bunch of hate comments. But if you do give me hate comments, Okay, I'm not going to delete it. I'm just going to make you look like a fool. Okay? Next, Barack Obama. A very cool president. He was an amazing president. I liked him personally, but a lot of people didn't. But he did get elected for 2 terms, so I don't know how that makes sense. But he oversaw the death of Osama bin Laden. He had to deal with many crises, the Black Lives Matter and racial discrimination, and also sexual discrimination between sexuality and different genders. He's also the first black president and also one of the few presidents to set up a healthcare plan, which we know now as Obamacare. And I'm not going to say my opinion on that because I've already said too much. Just moving on to the next president, who he is currently our president, but not for long. And if you say he is still going to be our president, okay. Tell me your hate comments. Donald J. Trump. He is currently still the president of the United States, and despite him being seen as an extreme racist, he got just under half the population to vote for him. Interesting. He's also the only president to have wrote a best-selling book before and while in office. Other presidents have published books in office or before office, but no president has done it before and in office. So there's just a nice little fact that you might want to know about him. He's also, as of right now, the oldest president, but not for long. On January 20th at noon, we will have our new president, Joe Biden. So we will get to him in just a sec. But overall, I'm not going to say but the overall amount of people, half the population says he was a good president, half the population says he's a bad president. I'm just going to go with the median so I don't offend either, an average president. Not below, not above, not amazing, not horrible, average. So don't send me hate comments saying that I'm against or for Trump. Okay? Joe Biden, the guy who will be our president. Honestly, I have a feeling this guy's going to do a good job. He's our future president. He's our president-elect. And when on his inauguration, he will become the oldest president of all time at 78 years and 50 days. And he will not become just the oldest president in U.S. history, but in world history. And that is the U.S. presidents summarized. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. My friend, he is our new editor, so that's less stress taken on me. But I'm going to be making these Google Slides now. Tell me your opinions on them. I love you all, and have a good day.